My name is Ruby, 35 years old, living with my little daughter in a quiet suburb near Denver. I am a woman who built everything I have with my own hands, from a childhood of scarcity to now owning 6 rental properties, raising my child through hard work and discipline. But no one teaches you what to do when someone who once owed you gratitude turns around and makes you the scapegoat for their own mistakes. I was standing in the middle of the courtroom when the opposing attorney suddenly called a witness, a man I had never met. He walked to the stand and swore that I had promised to sell a house to his mother so she could pay for her adopted daughter's tuition. Every eye turned to me. I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the shock. That woman never had any adopted daughter. In that instant, I realized I wasn't just facing an overreaching request. This was a play with a director, actors, and me as the intended target. Have you ever had someone fabricate stories and smear you in your own community, simply because you refused to give in to something they thought was simple? If you've ever been misunderstood, slandered, or simply stood your ground while someone tried to manipulate your emotions, leave a comment below. Hit like if this story struck a nerve, and don't forget to subscribe so you can follow the whole journey. Because after the trial ended, I discovered a truth far worse. And it all started with house number 14, the place I once thought I was helping a single mother weather her hardships. I was born and raised in a small Ohio suburb, where winters were long and dinner often meant canned beans and stale bread. When I was 8, my mother fell ill. Just a few months later, she passed away in her sleep, and less than a year after that, my father died in a steel mill accident. After that, I bounced from one relative's couch to another, surviving on charity and worn-out sofas. No one in the extended family stepped up to raise me long-term. They'd tell me, "Be independent, girl, be strong." Words I heard so often they became routine. Strong, independent, don't complain. I moved out at 17, just after finishing high school, and started working at a small carpentry shop where no one cared about diplomas as long as you could hold a hammer or mix cement. I learned fast, and within a few years I knew how to patch a roof, fix plumbing, replace windows, and eventually could estimate the value of an old house just by studying the cracks in its walls. I met Ethan when I was 23, while we both worked as builders on a project in Aurora. He was skilled, quick to laugh, and shared my dream, escaping poverty with our own hands. After we married, we pooled every cent we had saved and bought a crumbling house in a Denver suburb. We slept on an air mattress for 3 months, pouring every dollar into fixing the walls, replacing tiles, painting doors. We lived in paint dust, the smell of rotting wood, and the constant whir of drills until it became as familiar as a lullaby. We sold that first house after 6 months, making more than $30,000 in profit. With that money, we moved on to the second house, then the third. 6 years later, we were known as one of Denver's up-and-coming house-flipping couples. But there are things fresh paint and new tiles can't fix. Ethan changed. He started coming home late, drinking more, growing distant. When I became pregnant, he reacted as though it was a burden. "We have too many projects," he said. "This isn't the time." I kept the baby, partly because I believed he would change once he saw his child, and partly because losing my parents so young taught me that some things can't wait until you're ready. Zoe was born on a spring morning in a temporary downtown apartment. Ethan wasn't at the hospital. He showed up 3 days later with a teddy bear and an expression that looked more like resentment than joy. We divorced when Zoe was 2. I got full custody, and Ethan disappeared from our lives completely. No support, no visits. That was fine. I kept working, managing the houses on my own, renting them out, repairing, maintaining. I woke early, took Zoe to school, then hauled ladders to fix roofs. I learned to read contracts, to hire attorneys when disputes arose, and to smile when people called me a woman who doesn't need a man. Every property I owned carried years of sacrifice. Some meant 4 sleepless nights fixing burst pipes in winter. Some meant being cheated on construction materials, losing a whole month's pay. But I never quit. Not once. By 35, I owned 6 houses around Denver, all with stable tenants. I chose carefully, wrote clear contracts, but I wasn't rigid. If someone was sick, I gave them 2 months' grace. If someone lost a job, I let them pay in installments. I knew what rock bottom felt like, and I didn't want anyone to stay there forever. One of those tenants was Jeanette, a single mother living with her daughter Madison in house number 14, near the high school. I rented to her 5 years ago, before I even repainted the front. Knowing her hardship, I cut the rent nearly 20% below market value. She thanked me profusely, promising she'd never forget my kindness. I remember her words as she signed the lease. "Ruby, if I ever win the lottery, I'll pay you double. You've been so good to us, I'll never forget." At first, everything was fine. Madison was bright and well-behaved. Jeanette would occasionally call me about plumbing or heating, and I'd help for free when I could. We weren't close, but I felt I was doing the right thing. Until last fall, when Jeanette called me over saying she needed to discuss something important. I thought maybe she wanted to renew the lease or renovate her old kitchen. I didn't expect that meeting to be the beginning of a nightmare that would last months. A storm of accusations, pressure from neighbors, social media attacks, and finally a courtroom drama with fabricated witnesses where my reputation was dragged through the mud. And all of it started with one sentence from Jeanette, in the living room of the house I had rented to her below market rate. "Could you sell this house? I need the money to send Madison to college. You've got 6, losing one won't matter." I still remember Jeanette's eyes at that moment. Not the hesitation of someone making a hard request, but the certainty of someone expecting me to simply agree. She sat upright in the wooden chair by the window, hands wrapped around the teacup I had just poured, and pressed again. "Sell this house, Ruby. I'm serious. With this location, it'll cover Madison's full 4 years. You've got 6 houses missing, one won't mean anything to you." I didn't answer right away. Not because I was thinking it over, but because I was trying to understand if I had heard her correctly. I looked around the house, the tiles I had laid myself, the doors I had painted, the walls I had rebuilt. I had kept rent low here for 5 years because I believed I was helping a struggling family. "Jeanette, are you serious?" I asked, as calmly as I could. "You mean I should sell my property to pay for your daughter's tuition?" She nodded, unblinking. "She deserves this chance. She got into Stanford. The scholarship only covers 8%, and the rest, I can't manage. You've helped us for years, I know you'll do it. Call it giving a child a future." I exhaled slowly, forcing down the anger rising in my chest. Madison was a good kid, hardworking and polite. I had given her books for birthdays, encouraged her to keep striving, but none of that meant I owed them my property. "Jeanette, I respect your daughter's efforts, and I care about her too. But selling a house isn't as simple as you think. It's part of my long-term financial plan, my income to raise my own daughter. I can't throw that away because you asked." She blinked, surprised by the clear refusal. Then her tone softened, turning pleading. "I'm not asking for charity. I mean selling. You'll still get money, just one house less. If needed, Madison can promise to pay it back after she graduates." I stood, overcome by a mix of disappointment and anger I couldn't fully name. Not because of the absurd request, but because of the way she said it, as though I owed them that sacrifice. "Do you know what I went through to own each of these houses, Jeanette?" I looked her in the eye, steady but firm. "I carried my pregnancy alone in the winter, patching roofs in the snow. I once couldn't afford milk for my child. These houses aren't just assets, they're my sweat and tears. I won't sell part of that for this kind of request." Jeanette fell silent, head lowered, then muttered, I understand. I just thought you used to help me. I thought you still would. I said nothing more, just left the house. I thought it was over, that once I made myself clear, she'd accept it. But I underestimated her. Days later, I began receiving strange messages from neighbors. Some who once waved, now turned away. One even sneered, heard you're making money off a kid losing her college dream. I froze. I wasn't active online, rarely used Facebook except for local news. But when I logged in, I was stunned. Jeanette had posted a long story with photos of Madison holding her Stanford acceptance letter, along with shots of house number 14. She painted me as a wealthy landlord living in comfort but refusing to sell one house to help a poor child pursue education. No mention of the discounted rent, no mention of free repairs, no mention that the property was mine, not charity. Hundreds of shares, comments flooding in, strangers calling me heartless, cold woman, oppressor of single mothers. Some even dug up photos of me and Zoe, my 10-year-old, and posted vile words like, hope your daughter gets her dreams stolen too. I clutched my phone, trembling not from fear, but from fury crashing over me like an endless wave. Never had I imagined that a woman who once looked at me with gratitude could twist everything, turning me into the villain of a tear-soaked tale. I sat on the sofa in the living room, my phone face down on the coffee table but still vibrating every few seconds. Each time the screen lit up, it was another message from someone I knew, or a comment labeling me as the woman who crushed a young girl's dream. I stared at the photo of Madison in her graduation gown, holding her college acceptance letter, accompanied by Jeanette's words, crafted with all the dramatics and manipulation she could muster. We have sold everything we could, but a woman with 6 houses still coldly turned her back on my daughter's only dream. Not a single line mentioned that I had rented to her at a reduced rate for 5 years. No one knew that I once repaired her leaking roof for free when rain poured into her bedroom. None of the hundreds of people now pointing fingers at me had ever bothered to ask what the real story was. The phone buzzed again. A new message from an unknown number appeared. Hope you're happy killing a child's dream. I shut off the phone. My fingers trembled slightly, but inside I felt colder, as if I had just closed a door I had once left open too easily. The next day, I received an email from Zoe's school. The principal wanted to speak privately about some recent issues in class. I arrived on time, sat in the small office with sunlight streaming through the window, while the principal flipped open her computer. Ruby, lately Zoe has been withdrawn and avoiding friends, she began gently, though with caution. Yesterday, her classmates tore up her drawing and said some very harsh things. Some children may have overheard things from adults. I nodded, keeping my face calm even as my heart sank. The teacher showed me a few incident notes, explaining that one child had even called me the evil landlord when speaking about Zoe's mom. I pressed my hand against my knee, holding back a sigh. She never told me, I whispered. She's sensitive, but I didn't realize this was hurting her so quickly. The principal placed her hand on mine. I understand the pressure you're under, but I advise you to address this decisively. Children repeat what they hear at home, and if the truth remains unclear, people will always assume the silent one is guilty. When I got home, I found Zoe sitting in the living room, shoulders slumped, doodling in her notebook. She looked up when she heard the door open, her eyes uncertain. Is it because of me that everyone hates you, Mom? She asked, her voice no louder than a thread. I walked over, knelt in front of her, and lifted her face gently in both hands. No, it's not because of you, I said, looking into her eyes, the same eyes I saw in myself years ago, too young yet forced to try and understand things far beyond her age. We're being misunderstood, but I won't let you carry any more of this. I promise. That evening, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Amanda Grant, my former attorney who had helped me with small rental disputes before. I explained everything, from Jeanette's outrageous requests to the defamatory posts spreading online. The next morning, Amanda called immediately. You're being publicly defamed, and if they keep spreading false information, we have grounds to send a cease and desist. Do you want to sue? Not yet, I replied, my voice lower than usual. But I want an official warning sent, and I need her to stop now. Amanda began drafting a cease and desist letter demanding that Jeanette delete all defamatory content, cease spreading false information, and pay the overdue rent. I didn't want to drag this into court, but I couldn't sit by while my reputation, my work, and my daughter became victims of a twisted narrative. Just 2 days later, I received a response. Not from Jeanette's attorney, but from Jeanette herself. A short email, no apology, no hint of remorse. Only this: you want to play law? Then let the law decide. I won't delete anything. And don't forget, this community is on my side. I leaned back in my chair, staring at those words. Not a trace of regret, not a word to explain why she spread lies, hurt children, and put me on the defensive among people who once considered me part of the neighborhood. I remembered when Jeanette first moved in. She shyly asked if I could lower the rent because she wasn't settled at work. I agreed without hesitation. I even bought Madison a desk lamp because Jeanette complained her daughter's eyes hurt under the dim light. I never expected repayment, never kept score. But for some people, kindness isn't something to appreciate, it's something to exploit until you have nothing left to give. On Monday morning, while I was feeding Zoe breakfast and getting her ready for school, my phone rang with Jeanette's number flashing. I didn't answer. I had already sworn not to take her calls after her arrogant email, but the messages kept coming. I just want my daughter to study like everyone else. You have so much, and I have nothing. The government doesn't help me. You're the only one I have left. Are you really going to steal my daughter's only chance? I glanced through them and shut off the screen. Those words weren't written to communicate, they were written to manipulate. To make me feel as if not giving in to her demands meant I was the cause of all her misfortune. What unsettled me most was how guilt still crept into my chest, even though I knew I had done. It's nothing wrong. I thought about Madison, her eyes lighting up when she spoke about her dream major. I, too, had once lost everything and wished someone might lift me out of despair. I understood them. I empathized. But that didn't mean I should sacrifice fairness to myself. That week, Jeanette stopped paying rent altogether. No warning. Our lease clearly stated the rent was due by the 5th of each month. I waited 3 more days, then sent a written notice reminding her of her obligation. No reply. Instead, I heard from Geraldine, my neighbor across the street, that Jeanette was telling everyone I had thrown her and her daughter out on the street for missing 1 month's rent. I felt as though someone had struck me across the back of the head. I went to the corner convenience store where neighbors often gathered in the morning. Just as Geraldine had said, when I walked in, the room grew tense. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. The shop owner, who used to greet me as the best plumber on the block, only nodded faintly before looking down, as if ashamed. I bought milk and a few small items and walked out. On my way home, I noticed a strange car parked outside house number 14. A woman about my age stood beside Jeanette, listening as she spoke in a tearful voice. I hadn't planned to stop, but as I passed, I caught Jeanette's words clearly. Can you believe it? She has 6 houses, but not an ounce of compassion. I begged her, like I'd beg God. I stopped, turned toward them. Jeanette, I said evenly, I never evicted you. I never promised to sell a house for anyone. You're spinning a story neither of us deserves. Jeanette shrugged, turned to the other woman, and said as though I wasn't standing there, See? She won't even give me the courtesy of a decent conversation. I looked at her for a long moment, not to argue, but to memorize the face of someone who could look at you directly while playing the victim before the Dom community, casting you as the villain, crushing her dreams without a shred of conscience. That night, Zoe came into my room, hugging her pillow. Mom, today Grace said you stole someone else's dream. I pulled her onto the bed, wrapped my arm around her. I had always taught Zoe that other people's words don't define who she island. But when those words come from friends at school, they cut deep. You haven't done anything wrong, and neither have I whispered. People can believe what isn't true, but what matters is that we know we're living honestly. She nodded, but still curled closer into me. I held her tight, my heart heavy. Invisible wounds may not bleed, but they can rob you of sleep all the same. 2 days later, I received a letter from the bank. Jeanette hadn't paid that month's rent, and the penalty deadline had arrived. I called Amanda's office. I've tried enough, I said bluntly. They're not only slandering me, they're hurting my child. It's time we begin the legal process. Amanda wasn't surprised. I'll prepare the official notice. Then, if necessary, we can take this to civil court. I nodded, knowing this battle would be long and exhausting. But I couldn't keep bending, couldn't let someone weaponize their misery to manipulate a community and dump their burdens onto my shoulders. I wasn't heartless. I was simply no longer willing to stay silent. I had never imagined someone like Jeanette could sway public opinion so quickly. Within days of our argument in front of the house, everything twisted like a storm spinning out of control. On Facebook, she posted a photo of Madison standing outside the house I rented to them, face solemn, clutching her acceptance letter with the clear logo of a prestigious California university. Beneath it, a caption as long as a speech. She only wanted to study like everyone else. I hoped for kindness from someone who once said she would help, but in the end, when we needed her most, she broke her word and abandoned us. As a wealthy landlord, she could have given up just one house. Just one. But no. My daughter's dream was crushed by greed and coldness. The post exploded with shares and comments. Some sympathetic, others furious, many as sharp as knives. How can someone like that still hold her head up in this community? One person wrote. Another sneered. Hope her kid's future gets stolen too. She didn't stop there. The next post showed a photo of a street sign exposing my exact address. Her caption read, "This is where she lives." Maybe people should know the face of someone who denies a child's chance to rise above poverty. I wasn't online much, but Zoe was. She saw the post before I did. I only realized when she fell uncharacteristically quiet that afternoon. When I asked, she broke down in tears. They're calling you bad. A thief. My friends say it too. Mom, did you really promise to sell the house to them? I froze. Not because she doubted me, but because her young heart was being shaken by a world she shouldn't yet have to understand. I held her, gently explained everything from the beginning, so she could hear the truth from me and not the internet. That night, I logged into my long-abandoned Facebook account. Hundreds of notifications piled up. In my inbox, strangers had sent photos of my house, threats, even pictures of Zoe standing at her school gate. I immediately locked the account, reported the false content I could find. But deep down, I knew this wouldn't stop easily. A story spun with fake tears and dramatic words always rallies a crowd more easily than a dry correction of the truth. The next day, I went to the local market. The vegetable seller didn't say a word, just placed a bag of carrots on the counter, as if avoiding touching my hand. An elderly woman nearby muttered, "6 houses and she can't spare one. Poor little girl." I didn't react. I no longer had the strength to explain myself to every single person. I bought what I needed and went home. A few of my close neighbors still stood by me. Geraldine, the elderly woman across the street, brought over some homemade bread. She said, "Don't let the cruel words get to you. I saw you fix that roof with your bare hands when the cold cracked your skin." One evening, I sat with Amanda Grant in her downtown office. The printed posts, comments, and leaked photos were stacked into a thick file. "Are you sure you want to pursue this in court?" Amanda asked, her eyes steady on me. "I have to warn you, cases that become public like this usually drag on and are exhausting. You can win, but it won't be an easy road." I nodded. "I'm not seeking revenge, but I can't let a lie spread so wide that it becomes truth in people's eyes. I have to protect Zoe. I have to protect myself." Amanda smiled. "Then we'll start by sending one final formal request. If they don't remove the posts, we file the complaint." On the way home, I thought about the years behind me. The nights I stayed awake worrying about a leaking roof. The days I held a feverish child in one arm while calling suppliers about late deliveries. I had gone through it all with quiet endurance. I wasn't wealthy the way people imagined. I was stable, and I built that stability with my own hands. I wasn't someone who liked noise or spectacle. But if someone wanted to cast me as the villain in a tragic play they had written themselves, then I would show them that the backstage of truth wasn't so simple. And if they wanted to drag the spotlight to my doorstep, I wouldn't step aside anymore. I received a call from Zoe's school office on Thursday afternoon, right as I was standing in the driveway of house number 3, waiting for a plumber to check the pipes. The woman's voice on the line was soft, but carried something that made my chest sink immediately. "Ruby, this is Miss Meredith, Zoe's homeroom teacher. I'd like to discuss some recent behavior in class. Could you meet me tomorrow afternoon?" I agreed, my heart heavy. After hanging up, I stood there in the afternoon sun, sweat damp on the back of my neck while my spine felt ice cold. I had tried so hard to keep everything outside from touching my daughter, but the wall I had built didn't seem thick enough. The following afternoon, I sat across from Miss Meredith in a small classroom office. The window was cracked open, sunlight spilling over the neatly stacked notebooks on the shelf. She began softly, but her words froze me. "Recently, Zoe has been sitting alone during recess. She talks less, smiles less, and rarely joins group activities." I nodded slightly, waiting. "Some students have been calling her the daughter of the stingy woman, and even saying her mom stole someone else's dream. One time, Zoe's drawing was torn up and thrown in the trash with a scribbled note that read, 'Dream Destroyer.'" My hands clenched tightly in my lap, eyes fixed on the wooden desk. My throat tightened. "How long has this been happening?" I asked, my voice rough. "About 2 weeks. I think it may be connected to conversations among some parents recently. It seems some adults have seen the online post." I looked up. Miss Meredith's eyes held no judgment, only regret. One mother said right in front of her child that Zoe was the daughter of the woman who kept another girl out of college. Children hear and repeat. They don't fully understand, but they absorb quickly. I couldn't stay calm any longer. I drew in a breath and placed my hand firmly on the table. "I'm sorry this has happened in class," I said, forcing clarity into my words. "Zoe is a good child. She doesn't deserve this. And I haven't done anything wrong to bow my head to vague accusations online." Miss Meredith nodded gently. "I understand, and I'm not judging you. But I had to inform you. We'll intervene if this continues." I thanked her and left, my chest weighed down. Outside the school gate, I saw Zoe sitting on a bench near the playground, hugging her knees, eyes fixed on the ground. I walked closer and called softly, "Zoe." She looked up. When she saw me, her eyes brightened briefly with relief, then dimmed again. "I don't want to play anymore." I sat down beside her. "Did something happen at school?" She bit her lip, clutching her shirt hem. "Mason said I was the daughter of a greedy witch." Then the others laughed. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything." I pulled her into my arms. I could feel her shaky breath against my shoulder like a small bird trembling in a storm. I stroked her back, saying nothing. I was afraid if I spoke, anger and pain would choke me. That night, I didn't cook. I ordered 2 plates of spaghetti from a nearby restaurant, turned on the soft yellow kitchen light, and sat across from Zoe as she ate each bite slowly. After dinner, I tucked her into bed and sat beside her. "I'll handle this," I whispered. "You don't need to worry, and you don't need to feel ashamed. You're good, and you haven't done anything wrong." She nodded, her eyes lighter now. Before closing them, she whispered, "As long as you're not sad, I don't care if I don't play with anyone else." I stepped out of her room and closed the door softly. That sentence kept echoing in my mind. While so many out there demanded that I sacrifice to prove kindness, my daughter was willing to stand alone just to protect me from the sting of being hated. I no longer had any reason to back down. Not for my reputation, but because I would not let anyone's poisonous words hurt my daughter again, and no one had the right to redefine my character simply because I refused to carry a burden that was never mine. Amanda came to my house on a Saturday afternoon, carrying a thick file and a jar of chamomile tea she said was to cool the head when reading through this mess. We sat at the dining table, the late sunlight filtering through white curtains, casting shadows over the neatly laid papers. She turned each page slowly. Inside was the draft of a cease and desist letter, a legal document demanding the recipient immediately stop defamation and false statements, with the threat of legal action if repeated. "We'll deliver this to her house and also send an electronic copy to her verified email," Amanda said, calm as if discussing yard work. "With the evidence we have, we start with an advantage. But prepare yourself. I don't think she'll go quietly." I nodded. Still, I hadn't expected Jeanette's response to be so brazenly predictable. Just 4 days after the letter was sent, I received an official notice from the county court. Jeanette, instead of stopping, had filed a countersuit. She accused me of verbally promising to sell house number 14 to fund Madison's tuition, claiming I had broken a civil agreement, causing emotional damage and indirectly making Madison miss her education opportunity. I held the complaint in my hands, feeling like I was clutching a half-written script from a bad movie. The words were cold, deliberate, painting me as a wealthy, unfeeling, selfish woman who broke her promises. Jeanette wasn't just accusing me. She listed irreparable financial losses I had supposedly caused, including lost tuition, therapy costs for Madison, and even her own reputation in the community. "I never promised anything like this," I told Amanda, still gripping the file too tightly to set it down. "You don't need to prove you didn't promise," Amanda replied, her eyes sharp. "They must prove you did. No documents, no recordings, no independent witnesses. This case is weak. But since it's filed, we'll face it seriously." I leaned back in my chair, drawing in a long breath. What Jeanette was doing wasn't just twisting. It was a calculated attempt to flip reality, to use the law as a weapon. "Will anyone believe this?" I asked, part confused, part clinging to hope that reason still existed in the community. Amanda was quiet for a moment before answering. "In today's world, one sad story is enough to spark a storm. Whether it's true or not, many won't care, but in the courtroom we don't fight with feelings, we fight with evidence." We began gathering documents. Amanda asked me to provide every message, email, any notes from conversations with Jeanette. I dug up old lease contracts, repair notes, photos of the house when the roof collapsed, including one of me on a ladder, bundled in a heavy coat, hammer in hand, fixing her shingles in the snow. I sent Amanda texts where Jeanette had thanked me for being too kind, messages begging me to lower rent again because of temporary job loss, and my polite refusals to help with tuition, while still encouraging Madison to seek scholarships. Amanda nodded with satisfaction. Nothing here shows you agreed to sell your house. If anything, it proves you were always clear. Then why would she still dare to sue? I asked, resting my chin on my hand. Because you're vulnerable to public opinion, Amanda said firmly. And because if you're intimidated, you might settle. People like Jeanette survive by pushing others to the edge, then demanding concessions to end things peacefully. I remembered Jeanette's eyes when I refused to sell. Not the look of someone begging, but of someone already planning their next move if I said no. She hadn't been relying on my kindness. She'd been betting on my fear of humiliation. The next week, I received an express-delivered envelope, photocopies of the lawsuit and Jeanette's so-called evidence. A handwritten note, undated, unwitnessed, unsigned by anyone else, just a few lines claiming I had suggested I might sell the house if necessary to help a struggling child. Signed at the bottom, Ruby S. The signature was forged. I never signed that way. I handed the paper to Amanda, my hands shaking with fury. We'll bring in a handwriting expert if needed, she reassured. And I'll move to strike this so-called evidence immediately. It's scrap paper, nothing more. I sat in silence, staring out my office window. Outside was the small garden where I grew tomatoes. Beside the old swing Zoe had loved as a child. Every piece of it was a fragment of the life I had built myself. And I wouldn't let anyone cut those pieces apart with lies. On the morning the trial began, a light rain fell. I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes, watching drops slide down the windshield, my hands gripping the steering wheel until they turned white. Inside me was no longer the trembling of worry, but the quiet steel of someone who had passed the breaking point and no longer wanted to hide. Amanda sat beside me in the courtroom. She straightened her blazer, her eyes calm yet sharp. They'll try to spin a story that makes people cry, she whispered. But we have the truth, and the truth doesn't need tears. Across the aisle, Jeanette sat upright in a plain black dress, her face powdered pale as if to summon pity. Madison sat beside her, eyes cast down, avoiding everyone's gaze. I watched the girl quietly. Something in the way she curled into herself softened my heart for a moment. The judge struck the gavel, and the proceedings began. Jeanette's attorney, a silver-haired man named Colton Baker, stepped forward, opening with a voice smooth as a seasoned stage actor. Your Honor, this is the story of a single mother who spent her entire life raising her daughter with nothing but her bare hands. And just when a light of hope appeared, when her daughter, Madison, was accepted into college with boundless expectations, it was the promise of someone she trusted that was broken. And because of that, the future of a young girl was cut short. He turned toward me, his hand slightly open, as if he could embrace the entire courtroom with his words. The defendant, Miss Ruby Saunders, promised to sell the rental home in order to support tuition costs. That promise was not made in private. It was spoken in the presence of the plaintiff's relative, Mr. Harold Green, who is here today as a witness. I glanced at Amanda. Her face didn't change. She had anticipated this. Harold walked to the witness stand. A man in his 50s, with dyed light brown hair, dressed with an elegance that felt overdone. He was sworn in, then began speaking in a deep, slow voice. Around March, I visited my cousin Jeanette. That day, I heard Ruby say she would consider selling the house because she wanted to see Madison succeed in her studies. I was standing right in the kitchen, no more than 3 steps away. It wasn't just a casual remark. It was a promise. I clenched my hands under the table, eyes locked on his face. Harold never once looked at me. He kept his eyes on the judge, as if recounting some sacred event for which he was the sole surviving witness. Amanda rose for cross-examination, her voice calm. Mr. Green, you said you were standing in the kitchen 3 steps away? Yes. In March? Yes, around the second week. Amanda nodded slightly. Do you have any proof you were there? A text, an email, a photo, any record at all? Harold shrugged. We're family. I don't need to announce when I visit. Amanda gave a faint smile and placed a file on the stand. Mr. Green, do you remember in 2016 when Jeanette filed a lawsuit against you for financial fraud? Case number 92843, Denver Civil Court. She accused you of borrowing money to open a repair shop, then disappearing with the investment. The courtroom nearly held its breath. Harold blinked. That was a misunderstanding. We reconciled. Amanda's eyes narrowed. Is it true that in that case the court confirmed you used forged documents to sign the investment contract? That was in the past. And what proof do you have today that your testimony isn't part of that same past? Harold fell silent. Jeanette's hands tightened on her lap, her face pale. I saw Madison lean toward her mother, confusion written across her face. Amanda pressed on. Your Honor, we move to strike this testimony as unreliable, given that it comes from a witness once sued by the plaintiff herself for deceitful conduct. And furthermore, she pulled out a folder of printed messages between Jeanette and me. In all their communications, not once did the defendant agree to sell the property. On the contrary, every exchange shows polite refusal of financial support. Colton, Jeanette's lawyer, tried to object, insisting the evidence lacked context. But the judge raised a hand, calling for silence. Amanda returned to the table, her eyes meeting mine. No words were needed, her gaze alone promised we hadn't been pushed over the edge. Jeanette lowered her head, a hand pressed to her forehead. In that moment, I felt no anger, only an emptiness towards someone I had once believed was a friend. Madison sat quietly, wide-eyed, lifting her gaze toward me for the first time. Not with resentment, not with blame. Just bewilderment and perhaps a glimmer of awakening. The third morning of the trial began in an entirely different atmosphere. The dramatic confidence Jeanette's side had flaunted now shifted to exposed tension. Amanda, on the other hand, walked in straight as an arrow, her eyes sharp with purpose, like someone placing the final stitch in torn fabric. She opened her briefcase, set a small USB drive on the table, and calmly asked the judge to allow presentation of audio and video evidence. Your Honor, Amanda said evenly, on March 12th, during the meeting between the defendant and the plaintiff at house number 14, an indoor security camera was recording. This camera was installed for personal safety. That meeting is precisely when the plaintiff claims the defendant promised to sell the house to pay tuition. The judge agreed. A technician connected the device to the large screen in the corner of the courtroom. Silence filled the room. The screen lit up. The footage showed a clear angle from above. I was sitting across from Jeanette in the living room, 2 cups of tea and an old contract on the table that I had brought for her to re-sign because the ink had faded. The conversation was ordinary, free of any tension or secrecy. Then the dialogue played. Jeanette, Ruby, I really can't find a way to cover Madison's tuition. I thought maybe if you sold this house, I could borrow from that, or maybe you could advance it. Me, I understand education is important, but I cannot sell the house. This property is part of my long-term financial plan, and it's my main source of income. Jeanette, you have 6 houses. One won't bankrupt you. Me, Jeanette, that's not the point. I've helped you before, and I continue to by keeping rent low. But selling this house is absolutely not possible. The video paused. The air in the courtroom was thick. Amanda stood, her words clear. There was no promise, no suggestion of a sale, nothing resembling a commitment or agreement. This is direct evidence proving the plaintiff fabricated an event that never happened. Colton sat motionless, deflated. Jeanette stared at her lap. Amanda wasn't finished. She presented another file. We also have an audio recording from public court records in Colorado involving witness Harold Green. In it, Mr. Green was caught threatening an elderly woman into signing a predatory loan. The recording demonstrates his history of fabricating stories for personal gain. The judge accepted the transcript. No one requested to play it aloud. The mere mention was enough to shatter the witness's credibility. I looked at Jeanette. She never lifted her head. Her gaze fell, not from shame, but from running out of excuses. At that moment, Madison stood. She trembled slightly, her eyes fixed on the bench. "May I speak?" she said, her breath uneven. The judge glanced at both sides, then nodded when no objection came. Madison walked forward, clutching her backpack tightly. She looked around, then spoke in a fragile but steady voice. "I want to make it clear. I never asked Ruby to help me by selling her house. My mom told me it was the only way for me to study. I didn't want this trial. I don't want anyone hurt." My heart skipped a beat. Madison went on. "I did dream of Stanford, that's true. But I know my mom took things too far. Sometimes, I overheard her talking with Mr. Harold. I knew what they were planning, but I couldn't stop it. I was scared. And I'm sorry, Ruby." The courtroom was silent. Madison turned to me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for everything you've done for us. I never forgot. And I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner." I simply looked at her, wordless. Too many emotions surged at once: sorrow, pain, but also something pure, something honest, amidst weeks of lies. The judge nodded, recording her testimony. The atmosphere settled, as if everyone had seen enough. Jeanette sat motionless, her hands clenched to purple. She didn't argue, didn't plead, and I realized the only person who hadn't foreseen it would end like this was her. The trial ended in unusual quiet, no applause, no cheers. People simply stood, gathering their papers, their coats, and their emotions, as though they had witnessed something heavier than victory or defeat, the shattering of illusions. The judge announced the ruling. Jeanette was ordered to compensate me for defamation, repay 3 months of overdue rent, and comply with a permanent injunction forbidding her from spreading any false information about me or my family. Any violation would result in criminal charges. I didn't look at Jeanette as I left the courtroom. Some failures need no witnesses, they weigh enough for the one living them. Outside, I lifted my face to the autumn sunlight and saw Amanda waiting at the curb, coffee cup in hand, her eyes calm. She patted my shoulder as I walked up. "It's over," she said softly. I nodded, not out of joy but exhaustion. Exhaustion from my heart to my bones. But the sense of justice restored, not as dazzling as people imagine, yet warm enough to soothe. The following week, I received a handwritten letter. Cream envelope, neat rounded script. From Madison Green. I sat on my back porch, by the small tomato garden just beginning to fruit, holding the letter without opening it at first. I thought of her in the courtroom, trembling yet brave enough to speak truth, stepping out from her mother's shadow. I opened it. "Dear Ruby, I'm writing because there were too many things I couldn't say in court. I know my mom did wrong. I once believed she only wanted the best for me, but I saw the price you paid for kindness misplaced. I've withdrawn my application from Stanford. Not because I gave up my dream, but because I realized a dream shouldn't begin with lies. I've enrolled in a community college near our new place. I'll work part-time, and I'll make my own path without sacrificing anyone else's integrity. I don't expect you to forgive my mom, but I thank you for not dragging me into retaliation. I'll never forget the day you gave me that set of classic novels on my 16th birthday. You may not remember, but that day I felt truly seen. Thank you for everything. Madison." I lingered at the end, the words resting in my hands. A breeze stirred the wind chimes on the porch. Inside me rose a feeling hard to gather. Define, not pity, not anger, but a sense of peace. Because even among the cracks, there were still seeds that could grow. I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer of my desk, where I keep the things I want to hold on to for a long time, not for their material value, but because they remind me of the moments that changed me. The following month, I stood on stage at a local TEDx talk, inside a small, warm theater in Denver. In front of me was a full audience: students, teachers, business owners, single mothers, and people who had once been misunderstood by their own communities. I wore a gray-blue linen jacket, simple yet steady like the person I had become. No drama, no resentment, just an ordinary woman, standing to share a story that anyone could face in their lifetime. I once believed that kindness didn't need boundaries, that helping others was an unconditional duty for those who had survived hardship. But then I learned, if you don't set boundaries, kindness gets twisted, exploited, and eventually turned into an excuse for others to manipulate, impose, and even destroy you. I spoke about how stories online can become blades, about how children are the first victims when adults choose the wrong way to fight, about the strength of silence and the importance of speaking at the right moment. I never mentioned Jeanette by name. I didn't need to. Everyone in that room had their own Jeanette, someone who had hurt them while hiding behind the mask of a victim. At the end, a woman around 50 approached me. She didn't say a word at first, just held me in a long embrace. Then she stepped back, held my hand, and her eyes shimmered. Thank you for not letting silence win. That night, I came home and went into Zoe's room. She was reading the desk lamp, casting light across her bright eyes. I sat down beside her, not saying a word, just stroking her hair the way I used to when she was younger. She looked up. Are you tired, Mom? I smiled, light as a breeze. No, sweetheart. I just feel at peace. I share this story not to ask for pity, nor to prove that I was right from the beginning. I share it because I believe somewhere out there, there are people who have faced what I faced when kindness was trampled, when silence was mistaken for agreement, and when personal boundaries were called selfishness. What do you think? If you were me, would you have sold the house to help someone else's daughter? Would you have stayed silent under slander, or stood up to protect your dignity the way I did? I want to hear your thoughts about boundaries, about compassion, and about the limits we must set even in relationships that seem closest. And if you've ever had to choose between doing what's right and doing what makes others happy, you are not alone. Thank you for listening to this story. If you saw a piece of yourself in what I shared, or simply want to keep walking alongside these honest slices of life, I invite you to follow this channel. There are many more stories to come about family, about strangers who leave the deepest marks on us, and about the small moments powerful enough to change a life.